Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of I Like to Read with me, your host, Rachel Polanski. I am super duper duper excited to be joined by another Rachel, Rachel Vorona Cote. I met her through Catapult, the online publication and class system. I took a nonfiction writing class. I found her actually because she's been featured on the podcast before with her book, Too Much: How Victorian Constraints Still Bind Women Today. And so, Rachel, if you'd like to give our listeners a brief little intro before we get started talking about your book and your life and reading and writing, take it away.
Sure. Hi. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel, for having me on your podcast.
Thank you for coming.
This is fun. My name is Rachel Vorona Cote. I am a writer. I live in Tacoma Park, Maryland, just outside of DC. As Rachel mentioned, my book is Too Much: How Victorian Constraints Still Bind Women Today. That came out in February 2020.
So just before the pandemic.
Yeah. Yep. So it feels like
a lifetime ago.
Another era. And I also write for publications around the internet. I've written for The Nation, New Republic, Rolling Stone, Literary Hub. Just, I'm all over the place, and I also teach a nonfiction writing class at Catapult, and that is where I met your lovely host.
So I'd love to know a little bit more about your trajectory, sort of in your academic path. I at one point considered doing an MA and a PhD in film studies, and living in Los Angeles, I applied, to the three schools, UCLA, USC, and UC Santa Barbara, that have that. I didn't get in, but that's okay because there's, I didn't want to leave Los Angeles. Didn't work out for me so far. I'm glad it didn't work out. I think being a professor may not have, sounds good in theory, but especially now with how the world is, I'm like, okay, maybe if it's going to happen, it will happen. But right now I'm okay with it. So I'd love to hear more. I know, so you had a BA and then you had an MA and then you did get your PhD in Victorian literature, right? Or you're working on that right now still, right? So you have the MA or the MFA, and then, so I'd love to know more, like of how from undergrad and then how it led to, the higher levels of education, and then how that, led to the wonderful book that we have now.
Sure. Let's
brief history.
Brief history. Yeah. Don't worry. I won't.
I mean, we're here for the 2 hour long sort of the diatribe of your entire life.
Yeah, it's not that thing. I was an English major in undergrad, and I had been interested in 19th century novels, Victorian novels, before college. And my mom liked to read them, and so she would suggest Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre and things like that. So I had some familiarity, and I knew that I liked that time period. I liked the writing, the fiction that came from that period, but I wasn't that focused. What happened was that I ended up really falling in love with with my mentor, my advisor at William and Mary.
Was this during your BA? You felt
during my BA, yeah. I started taking classes with a wonderful Victorianist named Deborah Morse, who is, she's to this day, she's like a mother figure to me. And so I think between just having the opportunity to read so much more of the literature, because she was it. She was the primary 19th centuryist at William and Mary. and I think the only Victorianist. Um, and so I took her classes. She always picked fantastic material, so I fell in love with the books. I fell in love with her. I took this amazing class with her called Victorian. Fallen Woman in Victorian Literature.
So cool.
So that was obviously um, if as you know from the book. And then I really I knew that I had a really vigorous and intense interest in Victorian scholarship, and so I thought that I'd like to study it more, and that I'd like to write about it and teach it. So I started an MA program. Actually, it was an MA PhD program, but I ended up switching after MA because of I was able to get better funding elsewhere, and the person that I really wanted to work with was at Maryland. But in any case, my master's really just solidified what I had thought was the case in college, that I was really, really passionate about this stuff. I had the opportunity to work with some other fantastic scholars, Mariah Frawley, who is a fantastic Victorianist, and I also got to do some really fantastic work in queer and disability studies with Robert McCrure, and so at that point, by the master's, I not only had a sense of the literature that I was really fascinated by, and the sort of broad concerns. I was growing more focused. I knew that I was really, really fascinated by queer embodiment, and I was particularly interested in the way in sort of homosocial desire in Victorian texts, of which there is a great deal. So then I started doing doctoral work at Maryland. And again, worked with wonderful people. My advisor, Bill Cohen, I mean, he's still very much a mentor to me. I was writing the dissertation, so I got pretty far. I was, I did all of the there are a number of steps. Every program is a little bit different, but there are general hurdles that you must throw yourself over.
It's not just write the thing and you're done. Right. It's a long process.
There's an exam. There's a prospectus that you write, which actually, if a dissertation prospectus in many ways is similar to a book proposal, because you're pretty much pretending you know what you're going to say.
Right. You have the backbone of it.
Exactly. And I was happy. The decision to leave was a very difficult one. It was the right one, and I'm comfortable with it. But really, what it ultimately came down to is that I was working on my dissertation, and then I didn't expect to end up writing. I certainly did not expect to end up with a literary agent. The first time I heard from literary agents, I was I was doing archival research at Princeton and was sitting knee deep in all of these old letters, and then this email popped up, and I was like,
Or
what?
did you already have like some freelance writing behind you at that point? So how do they know how to find you necessarily?
I had written I'd written an essay for the hairpin. I had done a little writing,
Mhm.
and so my third piece I wrote not long after my wedding, and because it was my second wedding, um, I wrote an essay about the fraught experience of planning a second wedding after being somebody who got divorced her um, in her mid 20s, very like in very very quickly. I mean, uh,
You go into it in the book too, but feel free to give a little background. Sure, give us a little background of your.
I don't know that long as it was, I married my college boyfriend. We had been together for almost 4 or 5 years, and within a year, I knew I needed to leave. So this is a fraught thing, um, it is curious, and it's not something that I think we always necessarily talk about, but uh, for divorce, particularly um, young people getting divorced, and particularly women getting divorced.
Yeah, we
uh,
really don't talk about it.
it's one more thing that is
Too much.
yeah, it's it's sort of scandalous, or considered scandalous, despite the fact that, I mean, that just seems absolutely absurd when
Right,
over
because isn't it more scandalous to, stay in a loveless marriage and have, become depressed and all the issues that come with that?
it's certainly more problematic.
Problematic. Yeah. I mean, I'm a child of divorce. I mean, my parents got divorced when I was about 10, but I look at it as like, thank God they got divorced, because now I love both of them. They've both been involved in my lives, but I look at it as just, they were not a good match. And I don't, sometimes you meet people at one point in your life and you think you're going to have a forever with them, and people change and you find out you're not a good match. And to get divorced is definitely the better thing. So I'm an advocate of divorce for the right reasons, of course,
No,
and an advocate of people sharing about that. It's also, you're right. I'm sorry if I cut you off earlier, but you were saying, half of all American couples, end in divorce, and that's literally one of every two people you meet. So it's totally normal, but it is still so taboo, especially with younger people, because I look at it as a really brave and a really, the right decision, and it takes a lot of resilience. And so I think it's very admirable. And it's to be able to talk so openly about that, especially in a piece of literature, I think is very admirable. And I didn't know that that was sort of the essay that got it all started, kind of.
yeah, yeah, it was, and it was not so much about the experience of getting divorced, and I think, also what made it complicated is that I wasn't a perfect victim, and I was the one who wanted to leave, and we still have some issues with women wanting things.
Right.
And but I wrote about how, in some ways, planning a second wedding felt like, uh, it felt as if I needed to atone for
Mm.
the divorce through the way that I planned and through the way that I got married the second time. There was this sort of often present sense that, um, I really shouldn't. I really needed to be I needed to be modest because I had done something that was
Did
immoral.
you feel that personally, or did you feel like that was coming from other people and then you internalized that? Like, I know that's a complicated question to unpack.
I think it's hard to know. think mostly it was coming from me.
Right.
You know,
Like,
I
like were the people in your life, I'm assuming the people in your life were supportive of it for the most part.
oh,
And, like it's, you weren't feeling like no one else made you feel the shame. The shame was internalized sort of as, we talk, it's just sort of an internalizing that's passed down from hundreds of years of expectations versus the people in your life directly sort of
yeah,
shaming
well,
you.
there were certainly people in my life who were angry with me for the divorce. Um, I think everybody is pretty happy about where I ended up. But
Your husband Paul was in the background.
yeah,
Shout out to Paul.
he's got his headphones on. But yeah, everybody loves Paul, but I think there were people who were rattled by the decision,
I'm
and by
sorry. So you were in your mid-20s when you got divorced and you
yeah,
met in college, right? Okay.
I was 25. I was just about to
Okay.
be 26, and
Wow.
and uh, um, and then so by the time that Paul and I were engaged, everybody, I mean, he was part of the family. Everybody was very happy that we were getting married, and um, so there wasn't really a whole lot of talk about what the wedding was going to look like. But I sort of circumvented a lot of that
Mm.
because I decided that for my part, it was going to be very small. I didn't even invite a lot of my family. I kept it super small on my end, and I think and that I wish I had done things differently. I think I kind of assumed that
Oh, okay.
people wouldn't want to come.
So looking back, you do wish you had kind of invited more people
Yeah,
into it and made it big. Yeah, because there's such a second wedding stick. People say, oh, you shouldn't wear a white dress for your second wedding and you got to keep it casual. And it's like, who said, these are such standards that are sort of like written in stone, but like unofficially. So it's like, who the hell says that you have to do this? If you want to wear white, why not? If you want to invite people, why not? But they, especially, in any situation, it can be sensitive, whether it's 40 years later or 4 months later. So yeah, I can't imagine. And then sharing sharing that to the public is such a, like I said, it's admirable and it's so brave, and it also, you don't romanticize anything about it, which I think is really great. You don't, but you also don't like, you're very candid about the situation and you're candid about your faults too. Like you said earlier, like you weren't a totally blameless victim, and you're very honest about that. You're like, you present it and you're like, here, this is what happened, and kind of I changed and I own up to all this.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think that's. I think anytime we write about ourselves, first and foremost, we have to bring honesty to the page, and you know, and there's, and I think this is something that I think we probably talked about when we talked about personal writing in class. That certainly our perspective is
Of
going.
course, right. That's what makes it interesting, because if you're not honest and open, it's like, okay, well, why am I reading this? It feels, you can tell when a writer is sort of not being candid and not being honest, and they're writing to write, and it's like, that's why we have fiction. But
And I think that we I think that when somebody's holding back, knowingly holding back, then I tend to think that comes through in the writing. I think it's certainly I think it comes through in mine. So it's one thing. I'm sure that I suspect that in 5 years, maybe by then I'll be ready to reread my book.
so you, of course, so you haven't reread it since you sent it, or when's the last time you kind of, do you look through it? Like, what do you? I don't like to read my own writing either, so I get it.
It's hard, it's I wish I were the sort of person who didn't mind encountering herself in that way, but I tend, when I'm working on something, I'm in it,
Right.
I read it over and over and I pull it apart. move everything around and question every word and comma. But I have a really hard time letting go of things. And so when something is done, I really need to be done with it. And if I read it, I'm just going to ruminate.
Like, oh, I wish I did this, or I should have done that, or instead of just accepting it as it is. No, I get that.
And that's the hard, one of the difficult things about the publication process.
Right.
There are many, many months between when you're
right. So this came out in February 2020. So when did you sort of submit it and personally disassociate from it on?
I think that the final copy edit's probably done by the summer, probably by like July maybe
of 2019, which is over a year ago now, which is
July, August. I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure it was summer. And so yeah, there are months.
So about like 8 months before, at least. Yeah.
Probably, yeah. 8 to 6, at least
6 to 8 months. Yes.
Yeah. So you've got about 6 months when the book is done.
From there, you can't. It's out of your hands. It's into the editors and the publishers, and you don't do anything else.
Well, at that point, I mean, even your editor's not doing anything.
So it's just going off to publishing.
That's it. You can't make any more changes.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's hard. And
because then you're like, I wish if one more day, and I just
Oh yeah. And so in the meantime, you get to entertain all of the thoughts of how you might have rewritten the book. It's there is like a fair amount of time. Of course, when I do events, I tend, if I'm asked to read from it, I will. And that will be funny because I'll be reading and like editing in my head.
Right, and you like remembering the moment that you wrote it versus now and being like, if I could just change it, yeah.
Exactly. But I also, I think everybody's got their own process. It works for me now. It works for me to let things go. That tends to be the better thing for me to do, to write the next thing, to think about the next thing, and
instead of focusing too much on this one.
I am very grateful for everything that I've been able to write and everything I've been able to publish. And I am quite sure that whatever kind of writer I am now, who, to the extent that I am a capital W writer, I am who I am because of every piece, and that my craft has been shaped and chiseled by every piece. But I prefer to look forward and to see where the next essay or the next book review or the next chapter, where that's going to take me, where I'll be able to push things from there, where I'll be able to push my sense of language and structure. I do better looking forward rather than dwelling on what I've already done.
Well, I mean, if this is the foundation, then I have high hopes to see what comes after. I'd love to. We don't have to, revisit specific lines or anything, but I'd love to delve into some topics, especially now that some stuff has changed, even from when you wrote it and from when the book came out. So throughout the book, I love the format where you sort of explore each chapter is how a woman is too much both in the Victorian society and, of course, in today's society. And you use anecdotal examples from yourself and cultural examples as well, which is what drew me to the book, what drew me to you as a writer. The first one that I'd love to talk a little about is that, the too much and too crazy. You write a lot about Lana Del Rey, who I'm a huge fan of. And you talk a lot about the Born to Die album and the sort of, like the Americana and the My Pussy Tastes Like Cherry Cola, like that vibe. And then Norman Rockwell. So I was just getting a phone call. Oops. Hopefully that didn't spam. Anyways. And then Norman fucking Rockwell came out. And then after that, there was Lana she's been a little problematic during the pandemic. I don't know if you also saw that she wore a mesh mask to her book signing, which people were giving her a little flack for. And I love her. But I'm all like, support the masks. And if you're wearing a mesh mask,
she's
she's
dabbled in some white nonsense,
right? So but I don't look at that as like, I don't think of that as any part of her craziness, and I look at that as totally separate from her music too. Like, that's Lana Del Rey sort of as the person, but I think her music can sort of be separate. And so I'd love to sort of know your thoughts on Norman fucking Rockwell, and also sort of just the crazy trope of women, how if she is putting on any sense of a performance. I don't think she is, but I know that there are other female artists who do sort of, they put on this like crazy performative aspect for their music or for their, for their acting or for whatever craft. And then how they're sort of able to separate that as like a normal human, but to the public eye, it's so hard. But anyways, just your thoughts on Lana Del Rey craziness and musings.
Sure. It's hard because anything when it comes to performance, we're all performing all of the time, and so it's hard to know. I think that authenticity is, I think we do the best we can, but it's a little bit of a red herring, I think, especially when we're talking about celebrities, because probably in so many cases, for those of us who don't know them, who don't know Lana Del Rey, anything that we're getting is of course mediated. I didn't really listen to Norman fucking Rockwell that much, but I liked it. I think that she, I love her voice. I've seen her in concert, and
I haven't seen her. I'm jealous. I want to see her.
She was great, but she does. Oh, she did some. It was a few months ago.
Yeah, she did something problematic.
Yeah, and which it's. I'm not here to. I think that if we're looking for role models, we're going to be let down. That's not to say, I think that she said and done some shitty stuff, and that's to me not her post. I think it was a post about that was, as I recall, like kind of racist.
Yeah, it was like white supremacy-ish, like not good.
Yeah, it was racist, and she was making excuses for herself, and that to me, I don't remember how she was trying to defend herself, but I think she was kind of playing the victim, and that it's not, one cannot simply claim that they're being treated as too much when they're called out on their bullshit. You
then own up to it. Like, yeah, it was just sort of the like denying and, oh yeah, I haven't done anything wrong and everything else. Like, lost a little bit of respect from my girl, but
hopefully she'll move on from
Right. I'm not going to. And the interesting thing too, though, it wasn't like Lana Del Rey was canceled. Like people were upset about it. And I know that there was also, was it Cardi B? Not Cardi B. So that is one. Doja Cat, I think, was like found in some sort of like chat rooms for like some sort of like alt-right thing, and people were like trying to cancel her, but she didn't get canceled. And it's like the way we look at cancel culture now has even shifted so much just in the past 6 months, because everything is so, we're so quick to say all these things and without actually knowing all the information. And I think with the Lana Del Rey stuff, it's kind of like she had her time to, but she's not canceled. I mean, she did just release a book of poetry a few weeks ago, which I did really enjoy, that I read. And so I like that she's exploring more, because I think she's a great songwriter and I think she's a great musician. But speaking of crazy as well, it's so great. So you wrote about the Britney Spears conspiracy and conservatorship thing, and I think that's also taken off in the past few months. That is just really sad to me more than anything, like the lack of autonomy and the performative aspect. I mean, I don't know if you follow her on Instagram, but just her eyes and the way that she looks and the way that she is, portrayed. And we really don't know now at this point who the real Britney is. And then that 16-year-old girl who was, 15, 16, uber sexualized and all that. Like, how do you feel about Britney? What are your thoughts on Free Britney and the, the, and just also sort of just like the 90s, like the girl power sort of, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and sort of how that's evolved today. Because I know you're also a big fan of Carly Rae Jepsen and some more like modern contemporary pop divas.
Oh, yeah. First, I think it tends to be pretty hard for a white woman to be canceled, and
That's true. Actually, it's a good point. Yes.
For better or for worse. And I mean, like, we can't even. There are people who I wish would fade in, who people who most need to fade into the abyss. Are getting people from Trump's administration.
Yeah.
They're all doing fine, and probably will continue to do fine. I think in terms of, I haven't looked at Britney Spears' Instagram account in a while, and I think in part it's because it often does make me sad.
Sad. It's really sad because you just like don't know what's going on, and I think that makes us very uncomfortable. And it's easy to take it at face value if you don't really know what's going on. You might just be like, "Oh, Britney Spears," but if you like have any semblance of like understanding her life and her background, it's sad.
I think the thing that's complicated, I don't pretend to understand the full extent of what her
It's complex too. It's very complex. Yeah.
and of course, again, it's this sort of thing when it comes to celebrity is really complicated because so much of what we're getting is mediated through publicity and just there are so many layers between or potential layers that separate a celebrity from a public. It's a complicated thing because I read about this stuff and yeah, of course I care, and I think it's really it's sad. I think that it is the what it the narrative about the way young women's the exploitation of young women and what and the way that young women are packaged and sexualized and what's demanded of them and how agency plays in all of that. It's a really important conversation. I think it is a really important conversation to be having about people who have far less privilege than Britney Spears. And that's where it gets complicated because, we absolutely things look like they're pretty messed up for her. And you know, when I think about the sort of um, the attention that I have and where I should be putting my attention,
Mm.
um, I I have a hard time feeling like it should go to Britney. You know, I feel like, ab- you know,
Especially
uh,
with everything in
yeah,
just the past 6 months. Yeah,
yeah, you know, I as an unfamous stranger wish her well.
right.
I think it's reasonable to wish her well. As far as I know, she hasn't done anything reprehensible, but who knows? um, but I I sort of I hope, and I hope that things work out. It's awful to see a woman. Um,
Right, because I mean, you're a little bit older than I am, but I grew up with her and, Crossroads and the album where she is, sitting in the blue jean shorts and the pink t-shirt and just like smiling. And it's like, how does that go from that? We've all seen sort of the declines of, popular childhood stars from our youth, but I think that one in particular, because she was such a young, strong, vibrant, not a girl, not yet a woman. And then, I don't know the details of her conservatorship, but it is, there is so much attention on it. And it's been so prevalent from if you think you're having a bad day, Britney in 2007 had a worse than you. And it's like, yeah, it is important that we still talk about this as like a sort of cultural lexicon, important thing in our lives. But there are so many people who like focus on it every day and are like so wrapped up in this conspiracy. And I'm like, yeah, there are other, I mean, I I wish her well. I hope she's doing fine. But that's a really, there's other things that we could be focused on and putting our attention to, and people who are maybe going through similar situations, but like far less privileged and need attention and help more than Brittany.
I think it's hard because I know I I if I recall, one of the parts of her conservatorship is that she's not doesn't have access to a lot of her money, but
Yeah, it's like she can't make any financial. It's sort of like she's like a child. They've declared her that she's like the mental competency of a child and can't act on her own. So like her father or her agent or somebody else is like in charge of everything for her. That's what I think it is.
and I but my sense is that she's got people vying for her, and there's a lot of money there to work with.
Right.
And I
And she was touring up until pretty recently. Like she was still out doing stuff. Like she's been in the public eye at some point, which is why I think it's so fascinating too, is because I mean,
right.
like Lindsay Lohan also kind of crashed and burned, but hasn't, or like Amanda Bynes, but like neither of them, they sort of had their falls and haven't really bounced back. And for Britney, it's like she's really been through the whole. I mean, she was married to Kevin Federline, right? Like that feels like a lifetime ago. So it's like it's interesting how we focus on her because she's been able to sort of bounce back, but like how much of that is calculated and how much of that is like her autonomy versus sort of, what she's being forced to do. And it's like, Britney is, she's not really a person anymore. It's like who the Britney Spears commodification.
Yeah, I think that I would not be surprised if there were many people who were financially invested in keeping the Britney gravy train moving. Because
Actually, I don't know if you're from the guy who like has had all the surgeries, who wants to be like look like Britney Spears. He like had a viral the Leave Britney Alone guy. There's my friend's best friend is best friends with him, so they're going to be on Dr. Phil next week. Little plug, because he's had like over 100 surgeries to look like Britney Spears, and so my friend's best friend is like the friend going on the show being like, you got to help us, Dr. Phil. So I'm excited. So it's just like, it's crazy though, that kind of stuff, like even just me, like my friend's friend is like connected to this person who's had 100 something, like the most plastic surgeries to look like Britney Spears. Like that's his life. And so I'm like,
has he ever met Britney Spears?
I think so, because he was he did the like leave Britney alone, like the media, like you got, so since then I think he has met her. I don't know I don't know the details. I just know that he really wants to look like Britney Spears, and that's a good point though. I'll get the details. I'm interested to find out, because yeah, if he's met her and like his personal relationship, if any, with her, I'm sure he's had to have met her at some point. But it's just like crazy that this is now like permeating into these like seemingly ordinary people's lives, and then they've made something out of their lives just to
Yeah.
look like her. I'm gonna watch the Dr. Phil episode. I don't normally watch, but I'm like, okay, well, I gotta watch this one. Right. Yeah, it's just such a, she showed me my friend showed me the video that they submitted like to Dr. Phil, and I was like, he does look like her. Like, it is kind of crazy that, I mean, I know that there's, plastic surgery is big and people want to look like not themselves, but to specifically look like other people, it's like very like Michael Jackson-y, but even Michael Jackson wasn't trying to look like to look so specifically like one other human being is fascinating to me.
But, it is interesting. It's interesting that like, want,
And why Britney? I mean, I know he's a huge fan, but it's like, what about, your personal identity makes you
yeah,
want to physically become this person? Like, it's really crazy.
that you need to be fully yourself. You need to be this other.
Right. Like, I am not Rachel, like I am. But then it's also like, I don't know if he's interested even in the like singing performance aspect of it either, or if he just like wants to be Britney Spears. Like, that's even, because there's plenty of like, there's drag queens who do like Britney nights and like, Britney Spears impersonators, but like that's different than like my entire, like you can shut that off. Like, that's what's so crazy to me, is like, you can't just put off the mask. It's like, no, I don't even want to think how much money he's even spent either. Craziness.
It must be expensive.
I mean, it's really, it's like he was on Botched, I think, too. I don't watch Botched, but it's like the bad plastic surgery reality show. So uh craziness.
I guess I don't know. I had no idea about this. I
Forget his name, but like look him up, just because it's really crazy. Like, it is, and I think there's got to be some other instances out there, obviously, where there's like people who have had. I think there's like Kim Kardashian lookalikes or whatever, but like he is like the world record for like amount of surgeries to like look like Britney Spears. Crazy. Yeah, I'd love to. Dr. Phil will maybe help solve his psychological issues.
I guess maybe it probably is so tied up in like what we think is beautiful and
true. It's
become,
because is Britney even like that ideal that a 16-year-old girl with a push-up bra and like pigtail and stuff, like that's what's beautiful, and this like also
obviously beautiful to this guy,
right? And even her voice though is like, I've heard there's all those things where it's like Britney's real voice versus like how auto-tuned she is, and they like wanted her to do that sort of like baby cadence to set her apart from other people, so it's like that's not even her real voice. So it's like the authenticity and there's a lot there. But now that we're talking, I'm like, maybe I'll get him on the show. I don't know if he even likes to read, but we'll see. He's going on Dr. Phil, so we'll see if I'm good enough for him. But anyways, moving on from the crazy Britney Spears talk. So I know that you also had a chapter talking about self-harming and cutting, and I also know that you recently either submitted or just finished a young adult, or looking at sort of like the MTV print publication novels. And so I think with the cutting, I remember, I mean, I've dealt with self-harm, I've in therapy, I've dealt with some of my demons, but I remember even from a young age, like even before self-harming was something on my mind, reading like books about self-harming and seeing instances of it like in the media where it wasn't necessarily glamorized, but it was for a while like something that was sort of like very visual. Like, I always understood self-harming to be something as very like personal and very sort of like internally masochistic, and I felt like there was a period of time, and I don't know how you feel about this and what you think about it, but where there was sort of a glamorization of self-harming and of I can't remember specifically, but I know there was like a few young adult novels specifically, like one was called like Cut, and there was like a few other ones where, I mean, they weren't, it's all good, but I think and now, fast forward 15 20 years later from when that was. Now it's, we have PSAs everywhere and we talk about it, and we are so open to how the conversation on mental health has changed so much but we also, your book is comparing it to Victorian times and how, so it's clear that even we can say we've come a long way and these things haven't changed. And it's something that isn't really talked about so much, beyond sort of a like, we're here for you and let's talk about, but to talk about sort of, why it happens, and that, just love to hear your thoughts on all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think that people struggle to know how to talk about it, because it's not the same. Self-harm, self-injury is not necessarily the same thing as a suicide attempt.
Right.
And somebody who self-injures may not necessarily want to die.
Right. It's about, so that's the meaning and the intention behind it, I feel personally is very different. But then
I think it can be.
yeah, it can be. I mean, sometimes they don't go, they're not necessarily correlated. Just because you do, just because there's one doesn't mean there's the other. But I think a lot of people who don't understand or who don't personally deal with those things often kind of do just naturally group them together.
And it is, and it's I know that, when I hear about somebody else's self-injury, of course, it's a hard thing to think about somebody doing violence to themselves in that way. And so I understand why people struggle with it. And also, there's a sort of grotesqueness to it. When I was a teenager, I know that there were friends who were reading Prozac Nation, and Elizabeth wrote. She wrote some about self-harm, and which we're the late Elizabeth Wurtzel. She left us recently. And I think it's and she if I'm remembering correctly, she was one of the only ones. There were a few other books
in a non-fictional way. Definitely, she was like one of the only ones, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't encounter it in a lot of fiction that I had read. At least when I was growing up. Self-harm is a very baggy category.
Right, of course.
But yeah, and and Girl Interrupted.
Of course.
Susanna Kayson's memoir. I think I believe that she talks about self-injury, but it's true that
then you have like Sylvia Plath, The Bell Jar, and then you have you have slightly older stuff,
right? And which Plath's novel, I don't know that Esther ever self-injures. She makes an attempt, which is of course also but yeah, I mean that was one of my key texts. And
well, it's the ritual component of it is not there. It's like that's what is so lacked about it, is because it is such a ritualistic thing. I'm trying to remember. There's one that I read where it was very like ritualistic. Like it was a fiction novel, but the person was like, how they hid their razors and, the times of day that they did it. And the way it was very different than sort of just, seeing a scar on someone, described. Typically there's just the described sort of like the scars or the bandages around someone's wrist or the failed suicide attempt.
It's a, the way that we write and represent mental illness. I mean, we have to be so careful about it because
you don't want to be too. Of course, you don't want to be too triggering, and you don't want to be so.
I mean, I think one example of these topics handled poorly, I would say, is that series 13 Reasons Why.
Yes, totally. Which is a shame because I actually really liked the original book when it came out. I read, and I thought, I mean, it dealt with suicide, but it was not like the Netflix show. It was very different when it came out in the early 2000s versus then making a Netflix show about it. And I think that is a very good point.
And I think, I think one of the issues is that it is, again, this is really, um, it's sensitive stuff. But my sense of things is that the show almost created made Hannah almost like an omniscient narrator, which then gives you the sense that she was able to die and then keep living,
Right.
and that's a I think that's a dangerous thing to do. If someone dies by suicide, they've died.
Right. Their memory doesn't live on in this endless quest that then impacts all these high schoolers. And it's like,
And certainly your memory lives on, but you don't know
not with your voice, like literally in someone's ear telling them.
and it's not, and it's not it also, I don't know that this is what this isn't necessarily what she did, but it was almost, it's almost fashioned as almost like a revenge fantasy, and that's not why people die by suicide.
Well, no, it was a very overt, like, here is one specific incident that happened to me, and as a result, I am depressed and going to kill myself.
Right.
And it's right.
Reasons why. Well, and yeah, that's not
How it works. Even if you're young, no matter how old you are, I think, yeah, that's what's problematic, is it doesn't look at those nuances, and it's a very rote way to sort of present. And it's also like, I don't think it's not every book needs to be made into a TV show or a movie. And I think that was one where, I mean, I haven't even read the book in so long, but I do remember liking it when I was young. It might be interesting to reread it now, but I did watch the first few. I didn't watch the last episode or season of the series because it just got too, and then it was also sort of like, okay, they're taking that suicide and expanding on it as the catalyst for then a whole other 3 seasons of a show, that her suicide is the one thing that brought this town together, like revealed all these secrets. And I'm just like, oh, Netflix.
I mean, I watched the first 2 seasons because I don't know if I was hoping it would redeem itself, but it was, yeah, I found it pretty chilling and like a quite a waste of a lot of talent.
Yeah, because she's a really Catherine. That was like her first big role, Catherine Langford, the main actress, and she was like in Knives Out, and she was in a few other things. So she's a talented talented people in it. I mean, that's the Netflix problem. I mean, they just released a show called Social Distance, which is actually like executive produced by John G. Cohen from Orange is the New Black, and it's like, okay, it's supposed to like have taken place in like March and April, like the first weeks of the pandemic, and how people are social distancing and dealing with stuff. And it's like, sometimes we don't need to be watching someone having a Zoom funeral and someone's on mute. I mean, it's like, it has a really good cast, and it's like it's like 8 episodes, and they're all like 20 minutes. And I feel like Netflix specifically, like streaming in general, but Netflix, it's like, okay, someone had to, there's already been a couple other, I think, like COVID related things, and someone had to, but it's like, did you really have to be so on the nose? Like, we don't always, you can let us think a little more. Like, we already dealt with the stuff. We don't need a reminder of the 4 months ago when the pandemic, I just think that was pretty funny. But also on a lighter Netflix note, you talk about the Babysitters Club in your book. And I was a huge, huge fan of the series when I was younger. And there was a line, I can't remember the specific line that you wrote. It was like, there was something so beautiful about like dreaming of a different life and that other family. Like, even if your own family was perfect, like the fact that you were able to go into these novels and imagine these lives, and they're for children, but sort of like, how did those younger series, how was it like to revisit those things from your childhood to then talk about them as an adult, and then also if you've seen the Netflix Babysitters Club and your thoughts on that?
I haven't seen it yet.
It's really
And
good. It's
I,
very,
yeah,
it's,
I'm really familiar.
why am I, Alicia Silverstone is like, what's her, Christie's mom. So like that alone is like the perfect casting, like anything with Alicia Silverstone, but it's really good.
That's very intentional.
Yes, of course, but it's a Netflix got it right with this one. They
Yeah.
took the source material and they updated and did a good job. But yeah, how was it to sort of just like go back to some childhood favorites, revisit them, and look at them as an adult? I mean, I'm sure when I read them, I didn't think about them academically beyond just like, oh, it's so cool that Marianne's doing that or whatever.
Yeah, I can't remember how much I reread of the Babysitters Club, but um,
Or just, I mean, there's other pieces that obviously you revisit in general. So
yeah, it honestly, it was such a pleasure. I kind of felt like I was getting away with something. To
that's how I felt reading it too. I was like, whoa, now she's just throwing in all this stuff that I'm like, okay, amazing.
my my friend Sarah Martin, who has two fantastic podcasts. You're Wrong About.
Oh, I've
She's
heard of that.
yeah, and Why Are Dads? Those she's a co-host for that as well, and she's a wonderful writer. We we were in conversation when my book came out, and I remember the way that she described my book that it was like the Wreck-It Ralph breaks the internet of books because of the references, and I felt like, well, I that I've done my
You've
work.
done it, yes.
um, I was very delighted by that description. 'Cause I tend to like uh, generic and content promiscuity. I kind of enjoy going from making interesting connections and seeing how.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was love. It's a really lovely an experience to return to texts uh, that meant a great deal to you when they were formative, as formative texts. It's a really fascinating experience to return to them and to uh, especially if you underline things, and to think about
Did you have your actual books still?
some I had.
I know my mom got rid of all of them a long time ago.
I depends. I can't remember. I think I have one of my original Emily of New Moon
Mm.
books from when I was really little. But you were you it very much is a sort of re-encounter. It almost feels as if you're looking at yourself, you're looking at your past self from a remove. You remember what moments in the text uh, little you was really compelled by, and then you're aware of that, and you're also aware of how you're receiving them now, and you recognize there are moments that that are evocative to you 20 years later that you know it would uh, that you wouldn't have looked at, that when you were 10 you just kind of read and kept going.
Yeah. Oh, good story. And yeah, next one.
Yeah. So I think that, I mean, we all have so much to read, but I think that it is a useful experience to return to our favorite childhood books, and to sort of see to look at the expanse, and what's changed and why it's changed, and why we were where we were then.
Totally, especially with books. I mean, I've done it with childhood movies, and I've done it with. I've even played a couple of Nancy Drew computer games during quarantine that I used to play when I was younger, because why not? But there's something about the books, because it is like you can really just remember exactly. For me, like I know in my library, like they had a whole like Babysitters Club like shelf, and going in, they had like the laminated covers, of course, because they were library copies, and seeing what was new, and they had the all the mystery. I'm a huge true crime mystery fan, so all like the babysitter, the mystery ones, like Claudia and the Mystery Call or whatever those special covers. I was like, yes, like they just she was like banging them out. I mean, I don't know if it was Ann M. Martin, but she was like, I don't know if she had like a ghostwriter or something with her. She had to have, because like she was putting out like 3 books a year. It's like something crazy. I mean, they weren't the
She probably had multiple
I'll
gifts.
say they're no Jonathan Franzen novels, but they still take time to to write. But yeah, Babysitter's Club. Well, we've been all over the place talking about Lana Del Rey, Britney Spears, Babysitter's Club, self-harming, lots of fun and crazy things. Before we sign off, what are you working on now, if you'd like to share, and what are you reading?
See, well, I just finished a piece about Victorian parlors that
Ooh,
I was um, invited to write. So that was a lot of fun. I then I need to be working on a second book proposal, so I'll be getting to that. And then I've got another project about um, anachronistic feminist period dramas.
very cool.
Uh, Movies like Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette, and
Hmm.
the recent series on Apple Plus, Dickinson, about Emily
Have
Dickinson.
you watched Enola Holmes?
I have,
I liked
yeah.
that one a lot. That was fun.
Um, and what am I reading? I was reading Elena Ferrante's The Lying Life of Adults, but I haven't gotten very far.
I
Uh,
guiltily haven't read any Elena Ferrante. I know that I should, because they're, but I'm also like, I don't know. Something about it has never like really drawn me to them. I've heard they're good, but I'll get there one day. There's so many things to be read.
so much, yeah, so much time. There are so many things that I'm looking forward to reading. I'm really looking forward to reading Sad Janet by Lucy.
I really like Sad Janet. I talked about it on an episode before. You'll love it. It's really good. It's
And
like it's wacky, but it's like her train of thought is just like you're like, I want to be her friend.
I am fortunate to Lucy is a bud, and she's
Oh,
wonderful.
wonderful. Well, tell her I liked her book if next time you talk to her. And the cover is so fun. It just has that like dog on the front, and you're like, how can I not want to read this?
Yeah. Oh, I'm excited to read that. I oh gosh, I I also I have a copy of James Baldwin's The Fire next time. That
I haven't read that.
Yeah, it's a big gap for me, and so wanting to read that. There, as you know, there's always
Of course. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I'm about to delve into Joyce Carol Oates' Cardiff by the Sea. I'm like, oh, I just started it, but I have a lot to go. But I remember that's one too for young adult. I think I actually read her first as a young adult. There was like a novel. It was something about green eyes or something, and there was like a specifically young adult cover in the young adult section that was like white with these like green eyes all over it, something like that. But I remember I've been reading her since I'm probably a little younger than I should have. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me about everything. I will link your book down below. It's available at the Ripped Bodice in Culver City, which is right near me, and which I wish I had known about your book sooner and had in a previous life I would have gone to that event and that would have been cool, but maybe post pandemic one day. And thank you so much again. This is a wonderful book for anyone who enjoyed what we were talking about today. Just a little hint of the wonderfulness inside this book. And until next time, stay reading, everybody.